The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
State Representative Margo McNeil has represented North St. Louis County in the Missouri House for 8 years, and as term limits loom, she's ending her tenure by going to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. The Democratic official joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7,
6, 5, 4,
3, 2, 1. I think that is fair to say. Hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in St. Louis is
Jo Mannies,
a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio, finishing her sentence.
I'm still stunned. Too many things going on today.
And joining us as our special guest, we have in studio
Margo McNeil, state representative from the 69th district.
a Democrat. You represent part of North St. Louis County?
Yes, parts of Florissant, Hazelwood, and unincorporated St. Louis County.
So you're among the veterans.
I've been in the legislature 8 years.
Yes.
And when I came in, we had 92 Republicans and 72 Democrats.
Yeah.
So we thought that was really the minority, but it has changed.
We'll get to that in a minute, but before we get to your reflections on legislative service, we want to know a little bit more about you, kind of about your upbringing, your professional background, and why you decided to get involved in politics in the first place.
Sure. I taught in the Ferguson-Florissant School District for 22 years, and
what grade or what subject?
I taught art and in the elementary, although I'm certified K-12, and then ran for office the first time for St. Louis Community College trustee. Was elected in 2006, and then when Clint Zweifel was my state representative, he decided to run for treasurer. I'd been looking at that position and decided it was a good time for me to run.
Not to get too in the weeds here, but there was actually a point in time where Clint Zweifel was not going to run for treasurer when Sarah Steelman was running for re-election. When Matt Blunt decided against running for his own re-election bid, Sarah Steelman got into the governor's race, and Clint Zweifel jumped into that primary. It was a four-way primary that he won somewhat narrowly. He became treasurer, and that cleared a path for you, so to speak.
For the state house.
But
right.
But it wasn't the easiest path, at least for that first election, because you had to face Hazelwood Mayor T.R. Carr, and we'll get to some of the, I was going to say intricacies, strangeness of that in a minute. What was it kind of like, that first race? Because I recall it was seen as a pretty competitive contest.
Well, I was confident that I was going to win. I don't know why I would be that confident, because he was the mayor of Hazelwood for 7 years and well known in the community. But it was something I just felt that I had worked in the advocacy role for a long time, and I had friends in the teaching community and in the women's community, and I had labor support. So I just went at it and started knocking doors early, and got a lot of support from people in the community.
And the rest is history. I don't think you've had a very challenging re-election bid since. So.
Not really, although I always, I think back to I think it was 96, maybe 96 or 98, but a lot of women came in that particular year.
Yes.
And then the next year they were all voted out.
Yes.
And so, I kind of kept that in mind. And then I also know with our unlimited contributions that can be given, the Republican Party could have stuck a whole bunch of money into my opponent's race if they chose to. So I always ran really hard each time I ran, because I wanted to make sure I did win, and I also like going door to door.
Now, what was your key message as you were running, but also once you got in. I mean, your key objective saying, this is what I want to do. I want to do X, Y, Z.
Right. Well, first of all, my objective was to try and promote job growth. You know, we are in the height of the Great Recession, and my district was particularly hit by that. And so whatever we could do to increase jobs, as I said, public school teacher, and so I was very concerned about education and felt like that was the pathway forward for people whose jobs had disappeared, getting the training they needed. And so I got into the green energy sector because I happen to believe it's renewable energy is the future, but it's also an avenue to jobs. And that played well. I think in 2008 we passed Proposition C that said we needed to have 15%.
Yeah, 15%.
15% renewable energy by 2022, and my constituents were very positive on that, and I think it's good for the country, good for the world to go that direction.
Now, one of the reasons I was kind of jokingly hesitating about T.R. Carr for a second was I remember a few years ago he was appointed to the St. Louis County Police Board, and he marked in his application that he was an independent. And my first reaction was, wait a second, he ran as a Republican against you. That
Right.
makes me think that he's a Republican, not an independent. And it didn't really matter at this point because while you had to have a certain amount of Republicans and Democrats on, it just seemed like a kind of an odd thing. And then a couple of months ago, I was at the 1st District Congressional Caucus, and not only was he there, he was a Donald Trump delegate. So, this is also in addition to the fact that he was on the Ferguson Commission as well. So I'm not sure if you experienced any of that kind of party ambiguity with him, but I certainly have seen it firsthand.
I know that there was some ambiguity when he served on Hazelwood City Council because the current mayor, Matt Robinson, really thought that he was a Democrat and was urging him to run for state representative. And then he signed up, and it blew Matt away because he signed up as a Republican, which, of course, Matt was the county Democratic Central Committee chair.
Right. And I actually saw him this weekend, and he mentioned once that happened, he ran against T.R. Carr and I think defeated him in an election. So
Yes,
I think
he did.
I think Matt Robinson was very, very pleased that occurred.
Yeah.
Now, as a representative, have you noticed changes in your district, either demographically or what the concerns are? Have the concerns changed over the 8 years that you've been there?
My district changed in 2012 because of redistricting, and I picked up more Democrats. I went a little further north with my district. As far as the interests of the district, they've stayed pretty much the same. My district has a lot of people who work in the construction trades, and those the people in the construction trades and the Chrysler workers, they did not work for 2 years. So we were hit pretty hard with the Great Recession. There were a lot of homes that went into foreclosure, and we've had issues with property tax, drops in property tax. So that's impacted the school district, and Hazelwood School District now is trying to recuperate from the loss of local revenue, and the state has not been very helpful in this regard.
Now, when you went in the General Assembly, as you mentioned earlier, Democrats were already in the minority. Now they're even in more of a minority. There's less than 50 of them in a body of 163. So as you try to get stuff through, or how have you managed to operate?
Well, I look at my role, or the role of Democrats, as really to be a voice for, common sense, but to give the other perspective on the floor. And we have to, in order to get something through, we obviously have to work with our Republican colleagues. And there were a number of different pieces of legislation that I did work with people, on the other side of the aisle with. And I was very pleased this year that I was able to pass House Bill 2211, which was health insurance rate review. It was rolled into another bill, but Representative White and I both had the same bill, and Senator Sater was good with taking that on. The insurance companies and the advocates had worked on language and had agreed, and so. But I think what you have to do is definitely work across the aisle, and you make your position heard as much as you can.
Well, I followed the House Democrats in 2009 when they had more people, and to this point where they have very few. And I don't think it's a good situation either way, because when you're in the minority in the House, unless it's like a really close minority, like the Republicans have 83 and the Democrats have 81, right, you're going to lose on pretty much every major issue. And one of the things I noticed is when you had more members, it was actually arguably more partisan and more party line, because the votes were closer and there was a more struggle to kind of stay on the party orthodoxy on some issues. Now with less Democrats, I guess that there seems to be still that on some issues like right to work, but it also seems like the Republicans aren't as rigid about letting Democrats either put forth amendments or maybe even occasionally handle bills that are focused on St. Louis or Kansas City. What's been kind of your impression? Which is kind of a better scenario from what you've seen?
My take is that it has a lot to do with who's in the speaker's chair.
Yeah.
Because I've served with 4 speakers, and our current speaker, I think, has been the most amenable and willing to work with Democrats.
This is Todd Richardson, who's a Republican from Poplar Bluff.
Right. And his father served in the legislature as minority leader, and has, I think, talked around their dinner table about the woes of the minority. And so he's a little more receptive to those of us in the minority, and I certainly appreciate it. I think it's been nice to be able to present an amendment and at least get it heard, on the floor, and not necessarily that it was accepted or voted positively accepted, but at least had the time to speak about it on the floor, and to get called on more regularly. And there were some years, and somewhat this year, but some years we would stand 2 and 3 hours and never get called on.
Who was the worst?
Well, I don't think I'm going to go there.
Well,
but
why not? They're out of office.
Well,
yeah.
Well, 2 of them are. One of them is the most powerful state senator in all the land.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah. Each one had their own personality, and you learned how to deal with them. I found, Representative Jones could be very, what I consider more extreme, but at the same time he was nice. I would go up and I'd ask him if he would refer my bills, and I would usually find them that he would do that. At least would get them referred. So, but yet I also stood on. I understand there's a bad list, and I was often on the bad list.
What's the bad list? I gotta ask.
And what got you on the bad list?
I think some of the comments that I would make on the floor that points that I made that they found uncomfortable, perhaps. But
let's give an example, Representative McNeil. Come on.
Nothing lewd, but basically issues that's what we call on our side. There are those of us who would stand for hours, and literally hours, and never get called on. And I wasn't the only one. There was a list. apparently at the podium of who not to call on. That's what I've been told. Of course, they would probably
deny that there's a bad list. Or
deny that. Yes.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is education policy, because I guess in 2014 and 2015 that came front and center with the transfer bill, which both of them were vetoed by Governor Jay Nixon. And I think especially for the 2014 one, which had a provision that allowed people in unaccredited school districts to transfer to non-sectarian schools, it kind of crossed this bright line that Governor Nixon had been very clear about in 2008. And that was, if you put any quote-unquote voucher things in a bill, I'm going to veto it. I mean, that was one of the things I think there was no compromising Nixon on. And I think when that was put on his desk, there was no question he was going to veto it, because that's been kind of his consistent philosophy for a long time. And it wasn't only Democrats who were happy about that. There were a bunch of Republicans that were uncomfortable with that concept too. So with that backdrop, what I have noticed is, first of all, you could have a Republican governor who's going to have a completely different philosophy. And while I haven't talked to him at this point, we're recording this on June 21st, I'm getting the sense that Attorney General Chris Koster is a lot less rigid on school choice issues than Nixon is. So where do you think the future of that is going to be after Nixon leaves office?
Well, my hope is that people will come to understand how important it is that we have good public schools. And when you allow public money to go to private schools, and money, particularly when money is so scarce, you undermine your public schools. Now, I have a daughter who lives in Spain, and they have 3 systems. They have a public school system, charter school system, and private school system, just like we do. And as she says, the public school system, the private school, anybody who absolutely can't afford to sends their kids to private schools. And then if they can't do that, they send their kids to charter schools, the next best thing. And so the public schools are really left to to kind of the kids that just can't get out. We have an excellent public education school system right now, and it is in the best interest of all the people of the state of Missouri to maintain that great public education system where every child can get a outstanding education, or almost, we have a few school districts that are struggling, but, so going the route of vouchers is a very slippery slope, and I'm hoping that there will be those on both sides of the aisles that understand that and that will argue vigorously against it.
Now, one of the things I think many people forget is that there is a prohibition in the state constitution about money going to private schools. So some of this talk, they got to change
against religious schools.
Yes.
Right.
But the point is that there is it's much more difficult to just send money than people think.
Right.
And I think that there is that tobacco proposal, which may or may not make the ballot. They submitted the signatures, but they have this little provision in there, and it's because it's a proposed constitutional amendment that it actually would change the state ban on money going to parochial schools in particular. So my question is, because you're an educator and you've seen how some of the mood has changed regarding that proposal, as a legislator and as a former educator, kind of how do you see all this? Have you been involved in any of the talks, or just as far as your constituents calling you?
I have not had calls from constituents, and I myself am a big proponent of early childhood education and originally supported that ballot measure. But I know Missouri NEA initially took a neutral position. They've since come out in opposition, and I think actually your statement to me right now is the first that I knew about the language that would change it constitutionally, and I can absolutely see why educators would not want that provision taken out of the Constitution. And so, there also is another clause that would affect research
Yes.
stem cell kinds of research. And so I think the original intent was good, but they just went the wrong direction. And it is important. What the language in a bill is very important.
Now, as a woman legislator, you also were there during some of the huge controversy, especially at the end of former Speaker John Deal's early departure over alleged improprieties with interns, alleged mistreatment of women, either staff members or disrespect towards legislators. Claire McCaskill, who's now the U.S. Senator, was one who talked about incidents that happened to her when she was in the State House.
And then we also
over
had
30 years
State
ago.
Senator Paul Lavoda, the former House Minority Leader,
Right.
have to resign over allegations that he acted inappropriately among
Right.
interns. And then we had Don Gosen, while it was not an intern-related situation, had to resign due to an extramarital affair.
Well, he didn't have to, but he chose to.
Yes, but continue.
Okay, so my point is, what did you see as far as the climate treatment of women legislators and staff?
Definitely there is this sort of good old boys network going on there, and it's a little hard to break into it. But yet, Jeff City is a difficult city because you are away from your family, you do your work, and many people choose after they've gone to the cocktail parties or whatever, the receptions that different organizations and groups like Springfield Chamber or whatever have for us in Jefferson City. Probably go to one of the restaurants or bars in town and just sort of, do a little socializing. And so that kind of thing makes it more difficult, easier, I think, to forget why you came up to Jefferson City and all. Personally, I found I tried to read my bills before my committee hearings. So usually I would go back to my office and work from like 8 to 11, and I didn't do much of that. So I'm kind of out of the loop.
Yeah, you're not the first female legislator who has said that. In fact, we've had several of both parties who have said they don't indulge in the party scene in Jefferson City, and they spend most of the nighttime reading bills or writing bills or doing like a lot of work that apparently male legislators are. Not all male legislators, but some male
legislators were choosing not to do.
But I've asked this question to a bunch of people, and this is kind of borders on like a psychological exercise. But do you think like the environment that you just mentioned is kind of transforming ordinary or good people into these sexually harassing monsters? Or do you think voters are just electing really bad people to office and they're able to hide that badness with slick ads or mailers?
Yeah. I think that the voters are generally pretty wise, and that they, the people that are elected are good people that place themselves in positions that are compromising. And so, and the other thing that an advantage to going out and doing more socializing is you probably will rise up the leadership ladder a little faster, which is something, if you spend your time studying your bill, reading your bills in your room after session, you're not going to build the same kind of base. And so those that wanted to go up the leadership ladder probably found that helpful to at least do a little bit of socializing with their colleagues.
What was your biggest disappointment over the 8 years? Either something that you'd really hoped to get through and it went nowhere, or something that you tried to block and it went into effect anyway. I'm just curious, now that you look back on those 8 years.
Well, for me, I had two disappointments. They weren't necessarily personal. Well, they were personal in a way, but the fact that we have not expanded Medicaid was pretty astounding, given the amount of support that there was in the business community. 1,000 different organizations supported it, and the good it could have done to the people of Missouri. So I found that a big disappointment, and I hope that there will be some progress on it in coming years under a new governor. The other one, after Sandy Hook, the decision that the legislature chose to, the direction it chose to go in increasing gun rights rather than addressing some of the problems that, common sense gun solutions, I found just very disheartening. And I know my constituents, I surveyed them, they were 75% in favor of background checks and 65% in favor of banning assault weapons. So I think the people of Missouri are definitely behind sensible gun control, and yet we're not doing that. And I still, to this day, I mean, it's just makes my heart sad. And then now we've had Orlando. I mean, time after time, we have more and more. But Sandy Hook was the real gauntlet for me with those 6-year-olds that were pumped full of bullets.
Now, as you know, as most of our listeners know, on the governor's desk right now is a bill that would, among other things, legalize permitless carry. In effect, it's complicated, but the bottom line is it in effect gets rid of the permit system for concealed carry.
And I just want our listeners to know we're recording this in June. You'll probably hear this in July, so it's possible it may be signed into law by then, or it might be vetoed. But continue, Joe.
So I'm just interested in your thoughts about that. I mean, as we're taping this, we don't know what the governor's going to do, but I know he's under some pressure to veto it, which would then set it up for the veto session, which you would be at, to make some decisions on it. What are your thoughts? I mean, especially with the latest Orlando tragedy. I mean, what do you think the climate's like, and do you expect any changes?
Well, I hope the governor vetoes it. I've asked him to do that. I think the permitless carry, allowing anyone to carry regardless of the training or their training with the gun or without registering is a very bad idea. That bill also had a stand your ground clause in it. So basically, anyone can shoot another person and just claim that they feared for their life, or they were concerned about their safety, and the courts would uphold their right to shoot and kill somebody.
Why do you think Attorney General Koster has not received more criticism from Democrats for, in the past, being supported by the National Rifle Association?
I have not been aware of his stand particularly on guns, so I've been focused on that. I would hope that he would also interject some common sense notions into his stand on guns.
I mean, he has said nothing pretty much about this bill. And 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, he did come out against
the gun nullification.
Yeah,
bill,
the gun nullification
which
bill.
Even the NRA didn't really support too. I don't know what their interaction were, but in the past, in 2012, when he ran against Ed Martin, he was endorsed by the National Rifle Association over Ed Martin, and has generally opposed gun control. Though, as Joe mentioned, he has been talking a lot about trying to stamp out gun violence.
Well, and he has talked about a balance. That I'm using his exact words when I talked to him a couple weeks ago. But in any effect, I mean, as you're looking on this as leaving the legislature, and this is something that you're lamenting, once you're gone, do you still expect to be involved in some of these issues, or what do you expect to be doing?
I spent, I'd say, 25 years prior to being elected advocating for things that I felt would be in the best interest of the people of Missouri, and I plan to continue advocating.
Do you expect to run for office again on something else?
I probably will run for office again, but I'm not necessarily ready to say which one.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
Rats. We have yet to have somebody on our show who actually announces for the next office, so we'll have to wait for another time.
We've had one or two, but we won't have to get into that.
Yeah.
Now, but before you're leaving, you're going to the Philadelphia with Jason and a whole heck of a lot of Democrats at the end of July. And you're going to be a delegate. This is your first time?
First time to go to a National Democratic Convention, yes.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I am very excited.
Are you a Hillary delegate or a Sanders delegate?
I am a Hillary delegate. I have spent probably 25 years working to get more women elected to government positions, and have followed Hillary's career since the 90s when she was in the White House with her husband. And the one thing when I was running for the first congressional delegate position, I was saying it is really important to me that we have a woman, but it's nice to be able to say I'm voting for the very best candidate there is, the one with the most experience and leadership, and so I don't have to say I'm voting for this person because she's a woman. I'm voting for her because she's the very best candidate.
Now, it's going to be pretty expensive. And in fact, I was telling Jason about this because he's facing the hotel bill, the infamous hotel bill, which is roughly, what, $800 a night?
I just got the bill a couple of minutes before the podcast started. Depending on which type of room you have, it ranges anywhere from, I think, $550 to $730.
And that's before taxes.
I believe so, and I think I'm going to obviously try to get the least expensive room since I'm only one person. But I haven't, as of this moment in time, that is not set in stone yet.
Now, just so our listeners know, this is significantly higher. I would say, arguably, about twice as much as what Democrats delegates had to pay in Charlotte 4 years ago. This just kind of shows how the inflation on some of the convention costs on both sides. I'm going to the Republican convention, and the hotel room's a lot cheaper, but we're also an hour away from the convention hall. In you guys' case, you're just going to be a few blocks away. Are you going to bankroll it yourself or using some of your raising money? I've seen at least one delegate's putting out an appeal for donations. I'm just interested in how you're doing this.
I plan to bankroll it myself, I guess. I'm not going to use my campaign funds, but it's pretty outrageous. When I first got the information, I called the Courtyard Marriott in Philadelphia, and I just asked what a room would be for the following week, and they told me it was around $200. So I'm like, okay, that's quite a markup there, but
I heard
they can do it.
It could be a situation because they're trying to take advantage of the fact that all these people are coming. Could just be proximity to the convention hall, because everybody I've talked to has said this is a very convenient location compared to others. Joe, for example, is going to the Republican convention in Cleveland, and the Republicans are staying in Akron, Ohio, which is 45 or 50 minutes away.
Right. They were assigned, just so listeners understand, the delegations don't just decide, I'm going to be at the Courtyard Marriott. No, the national parties, they have a grid, and they pick, because there's 50 states and plus some islands and Puerto Rico and whoever. So they decide where these delegations are going to stay. So it's all about relationships or political power. And what intrigues me is that for at least the last 10, 12 years, the Missouri Democrats, because of various reasons, different people claim who it is, but I think in 2004 it was definitely Dick Gephardt. But the bottom line is they always had pretty decent hotels, very close. The Republicans, in a state that's allegedly a Republican state as far as the presidential candidates, Missouri Republicans have been getting hosed for decades. For decades. At least we're staying in a Hilton this time. And I will say, in 2008, we were in St. Paul. We were in a very, very primitive hotel. And it was so bad that some of the major Republican figures in the state, I will not mention them, refused to stay there. That's how bad it
we
was.
have spent way too much time talking about the hotel. What's your expectations for the actual convention? Because, I mean, unless there's a miracle upon miracles, Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee. But Bernie Sanders supporters are still going to have a pretty significant presence there, including in the Missouri delegation, where they're going to compose about half of it. What are kind of your general expectations given those variables?
I'm going to base my statements on like the state convention, because the state convention actually had more Bernie delegates that attended, like 450 to 325.
Does that show
Hillary.
the level of greater enthusiasm for Sanders than for Hillary still in
I
Missouri?
think it does show enthusiasm for the Bernie group, and they also were very I think intent upon trying to get some concessions as far as the resolutions.
The party platform.
The party platform, and then there were 4 members of the DNC that were elected, and the Bernie people were able to get their entire slate elected, which everyone gave a speech. All 8 candidates gave a speech. I thought that there was a lot of enthusiasm and energy in the speeches that they gave, the Bernie people gave. This will be for the next election, the next convention, so in 2020. And in a way, I think there's some It's nice that we're going to have a new group that comes in with fresh eyes and enthusiasm, and so I think that's probably going to be pretty good for the Democratic Party. It's not, I did not vote for all them, but I still, think that it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
What came out of the state convention was the party platform was accepted by acclamation. So even though and the 20 or so planks that they listed, I had no problem with all but most of them. There were 2 that I was a little questionable, but they were the way they were worded, it was fine. And then when the delegates all got together, we voted by acclamation that Roy Temple would lead our delegation. That was also a positive sign. And so I think that the national convention, that the Bernie delegates are, their mission is to look to the future for the Democratic Party and to make sure that these planks are in place, $15 an hour, or work toward $15 an hour wages, climate change solutions, and there were quite a list. But
yeah, and just my observation as being there, I've heard other conventions elsewhere have gotten a lot testier. There were some skirmishes over the audio system, which actually took a really long time to resolve.
Yeah.
But generally, I found that, the Bernie Sanders people had more people there, so they were going to prevail on something.
Right.
And I think the Hillary Clinton people knew that was the case. So I think that made the convention more harmonious than maybe, say, Nevada was, because they showed up. And frankly, the Clinton people, which I will call them shorthand, like, you showed up because I saw you there and I chatted with you, but a lot of them didn't for some reason. And the consequence is you have 4 DNC members from Missouri who are aligned with Sanders, including a professional wrestler named Curtis Wild,
Right.
who happened to channel Owen Hart in his speech, which I found very entertaining. But what do you think that's going to mean for the party that in the next 4 years, the DNC representatives, save for Brian Wabi, who is an at-large person, are going to be aligned with Sanders and not Clinton?
Well, I imagine they're going to. One of the planks was to move more toward individual delegate representation and away from the superdelegate piece of our delegate selection. And I think that is they will probably be pushing for that. And that's actually a debate that I think would be good to have. But, we put the superdelegates into place for reasons a
And
number
you
of
look
years
at
ago.
The Republican,
Yes,
what's going on with the Republicans? They don't have
Right.
superdelegates. They have a few little handful. And I think without taking sides, I think because of that, that's one of the reasons they're in the position they're in right now.
Let's say Donald Trump had run for the Democratic nomination. I could imagine that would be an instance where the superdelegates would be like, I'm sorry, Donald Trump is not going to be our nominee. We're going to have somebody else there.
Right. So I think the superdelegates are there, and I think that's a good discussion. What happened this year, Secretary Clinton was able to get enough votes and delegates that she had the majority, and so it wouldn't have mattered. The superdelegates don't really.
Well, and she got more votes from the public.
From the public,
and she had more pledge delegates. Yeah. So if Sanders had somehow won the nomination through the strength of superdelegates, it would effectively be overturning the results of the primary.
Yes.
Right.
Now, obviously, if it was very close, like it was basically tied with pledge delegates, it'd be another story. But it's not.
Yeah.
So, but still, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned too, they are going to play a pretty significant role in the convention, at least with the platform.
Right.
Because a lot of their ideas, I think a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters like. Some don't like all their ideas, but I think they're going to be a factor.
I think they are too. And one of the things that the Sanders campaign is pushing is free public college education for all students, which I think is a wonderful idea. But at the same time, you have got to convince 500 and some odd legislators, congressmen and senators, that that's a good investment of our money. And I think that there are going to have to be a lot of people that change before they're going to go with that. But I do think there are definitely things that can happen, like changing the interest rate for college loans. Right now, I think it's maybe 8%, which is, and the government's making money on that. That's outrageous. And I think Secretary Clinton, as president, would be working very hard to make sure that changed, as well as moving forward on lowering the cost of college for students.
Well, we want to just thank you for coming in, and also thank you for your legislative service. We'll have to have you back on the show if you ever run for anything again.
Sure.
For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMannies.
And are you on Twitter, Representative?
I am. Margo McNeil. I think that's my Twitter handle. So if you just type in Margo McNeil, and I should pop up.
And
I love
that's
Twitter.
MCNEIL.
MCNEIL.
That's important. There are MCNEAL.
And ILL, and there's lots of different spellings of McNeil. But
so one L, one I.
Yeah.
Thankfully, only one spelling of Rosenbaum for now.
Right.
We'll be back next time. Until then, so long.
I got water and I got holes. The sons and daughters of hungry so la 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 la. I got water and I got holes.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.